Hello, everybody. Scott Golden here with Golden Opportunities Coaching, welcoming those of you who are new. Welcome back to those of you who are seasoned veterans of what we do around here. So glad that we've crossed the 250 subscriber mark. Would love to hit 350 by the end of July. Please help with that. Share with friends, family, and loved ones about the good work we're doing here and get them to subscribe. That'd be wonderful. We're going to talk today about grief and some of the misnomers and misunderstandings about the grieving process. There's about 5 things I want to cover today. We all grieve over different things, but they're all related to one basic concept, and that concept is loss. We grieve over loss because we are human beings who oftentimes automatically take things for granted. We don't expect things to change, but change is a constant within our society, within our lives. And when we don't expect change to come that brings something to an ending, be it a relationship, a job, the life of a loved one, the life of someone that we care about, or any other situation, the end of a friendship, we don't expect things to end. And so one of the ways to deal with grief is to live your life as though what I call it's the beginning of the end and the end of the beginning. That every day is a new opportunity to embrace and be present moment minded toward the people whom are in our lives and the situations that are in our lives. That nothing lasts forever, even the most strong relationships. And I was taught this by my grandparents, who were married over 60 years. And my grandfather, when my grandmother died, she passed away first. He said something that was so profound to me, and this was almost a decade and a half ago. He said, I always knew she was temporary. I just didn't know when it would end. And I was like, well, you were married for 60 plus years. How can you say you knew she was temporary? And he said, because everything is. So when you live that way, that everything is temporary and that all things are to be embraced in the moment, embraced for what they are, which is in your life right now, we don't know how long things are going to last, grieving becomes so much, not easier, but it takes a different force. We realize that we are grieving the loss of something that we become comfortable with, but we can switch to celebration easier when we have lived life to its fullest at every given opportunity. We all grieve over different things. We grieve loss differently, but the way to get past loss is the memory of what we have gained from a person. Remember, life is about balance. So with every loss, there are gains. And we gain from relationships. We gain from work experience. We gain from romantic relationships. We gain from all things. And when we look at what we have gained, when we look at how we have grown, that's where the strength to recover comes from. Another thing that is especially common in Western culture, although it does permeate the entire world, is this misnomer that weakness is not okay. That if we cry, if we show vulnerability, if we're angry, if we're sullen and withdrawn, if we stay in grief too long, if we stay in grief and we separate ourselves out from society for a while, if we stay in grief and we go back there quite a bit, that somehow there's this misnomer that there's a perfect time for everything to be done with, including the grieving process. This misnomer causes more harm than good in the majority of people's lives. The reason being, every person grieves differently. Everyone goes through it differently. Some people need narcissistic expression. Other people need to exercise more. Other people need things like journaling or talk therapy. Some people need to be in nature. Every person reacts to the grieving process differently, and every person is going to have a unique journey. And even if you think you're over something, you may still have a few days every year or certain life experiences that cause the grief to come flooding back at you. I know that a central figure in my life committed suicide. It'll be 13 years in October, and the person I became as a result of that loss is directly related to the work I do now and all these things. And there are still, and I can call them 2 days a year. So since her passing, we're talking 26 days out of my life where I give myself permission to check out emotionally, and I go and I allow myself to re-grieve the loss, because in a lot of ways that situation did fundamentally change who I was. And I think that's important. If there are grieving related things that we do, it's also grief and trauma are so interlinked. A lot of traumatic experiences cause a weird relationship with grief where some people, and this is one of the tenets of the work that I do, is the belief that some people, if they don't recover from their trauma properly, never do recover. There is a segment of the population that will go through a traumatic, grief-filled experience and never emotionally and mentally recover. Our society does not properly take care of these people in terms of reintegration, and therefore we have people who go into addiction to cope. They go into self-loathing and self-hate to cope, self-harm, suicidal ideation, and a whole bunch of other things. And the reality is, for most of those people who are in that, what the world calls mentally ill state, it's because in some way they went through a traumatic experience causing themselves grief, or that caused them to be in a grief state that they never recovered from. And instead of labeling them, we've got to help them relanguage things. And that's a whole other video, but it's important because guilt is a main force in that, and I want to talk about that a little bit. People have both survivor's guilt and thriver's guilt. So if you leave, for example, an abusive relationship, you may have thriver's guilt. Gee, this person who treated me badly, who has all these issues, they're still struggling and I'm happy. How dare I be happy? Or survivor's guilt. This person is no longer alive. How can I be happy? We see this especially when a person loses a spouse, they lose a friend, they lose a parent or a family member they're close to, and they think that because of that loss, somehow they have lost the right to experience life fully. And that guilt, although it permeates mostly the unconscious and subconscious mind, when it comes to the conscious mind, can actually cause a person to sabotage their own life. That's horrible, and it's difficult. Acceptance, and this is the final point of this particular audio, but acceptance is a lifelong process. You will have moments, and I guarantee you this, and I think one of the healthiest things we can do is to say, you never know when grief is going to hit you again over something that might have happened months, years, or even decades ago. And so if something hits you again, give it space, give it a time limit, maybe a few hours, maybe a day or two. Give it a time limit. Let it come to the surface completely validly, that all your emotions about the situation are valid, but they need to be quartered and separated out so that you can continue to function, so you can continue to honor the legacy of the person or situation that has been lost. But you do need to give them an outlet, because without an outlet, they will only seep further into your consciousness and thereby create for you, more problems. So hopefully this has been helpful. I do truly hope that if I can be of assistance, you'll reach out either on Twitter at PO Perception or here on YouTube, in the YouTube mailbox. In any event, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Till next time, everybody.